everyone, and welcome to episode 10 of Daddy's Chats. I totally didn't just record this, realise my lights went on, and go for this again. I'm here with Dennis Fang, and I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Dennis. Dennis.Fang on TikTok. We met on the platform and we both make history content, but I sort of talk a bit more about philosophy and geopolitics and a wide range of topics. Everyone tells me that I can't decide on a single niche, and that's probably detrimental to me, but oh well. It's basically...
It's not a total negative being a bit of a jack of all trades.
Yes, but you're a master of none, and the algorithm can't place you anywhere. So it is a negative. If you're starting a TikTok, niche down.
Yes.
Okay?
That was... Actually, when I first started, I had such varied content, and now when I got into narrowed on history, that was when I went, like...
Oh, yes.
But you've been much...
But the
Sorry, go on.
But the problem is, if you do niche down too much, you're going to put yourself in a tiny hole that you can't get out of. So maybe you make videos about, I don't know, kimono dresses, and all your viral content of kimono dresses, and you can't get out of there. Otherwise, people are confused. So obviously, we need a bit of moderation. Don't go too extreme.
That's why people end up with like 6 or 7 different YouTube channels and stuff like that. Everyone, at some point you're going to end up making a gaming channel. Everyone makes a gaming channel at some point.
I've done that. I've had a gaming channel. It was a disaster. So never again.
My gaming channel will never be revealed. In fact, I'm fairly certain it's privated.
Oh my god. Now that the cat's out of the bag, you need to reveal it. All your audience, all your fans will want to see the terribleness. Back on top.
Yeah, when I hit 20K.
Can we get back on topic?
Yeah. So the start.
Let's get him to 20.
Yeah. This is already. I warned you before we recorded that the tangents would hit quick. But
we need to niche down on this podcast.
So we'll start off by going. So what got you into talking about obviously philosophy and politics and history? Like, what got you into talking about that on TikTok and stuff?
Well, basically, I've been making content on the internet for, it feels like a decade at this point. I've made vlogs, I've made gaming videos, tech videos, YouTube drama videos, and so I've been playing around with all these things. And at the middle of COVID, I couldn't sort of make any of my usual YouTube drama videos because it requires other people. So I was like, oh my god, this is an opportunity to try something new and try something that I haven't been able to talk about or explore before, which was history and politics and stuff like that. And much to my surprise, I found a little bit of success. By little bit, I mean getting more than 2 comments from people who aren't my friends. And I thought, oh my god, there's something in here. There's a niche that I can probably exploit. And at the time, TikTok history was full of terrible content. I don't want to name any names. It was mainly 10 things you didn't know about the Roman Empire. And there'll be someone pointing up here saying, Julius Caesar, he was bald. Who cares? Who cares?
I don't often do debunking content because obviously I'm just a history buff, so I'm never that well versed to fully debunk stuff. The only time I've ever done a debunking video with, again, won't say names, but someone made a video about Cleopatra and inventing the vibrator. I feel like I can get away with saying that on YouTube.
What?
Yeah, and it was like putting bees or wasps into a gourd or something, and I just I was like, I can confidently debunk this because this is hilariously.
The typical conversation around Cleopatra was that discussing her race, and I don't understand people who believe that she was she's obviously not a native Egyptian, but some people conflate that even further and say that she was like sort of sub-Saharan African, which is a leap of logic that's way beyond me. It's absolutely insane. She was Macedonian.
Yeah, at least this tangent is
and Macedonian with a hard C.
Yeah. Oh, I get so many comments. It's Macedonian, and you get the Greeks in the comments going, "No, it's Macedonia," and Yeah. That I think that was actually our first collaboration. Actually, the Who's Right, Greece or North
Oh
Macedonia.
yes, yes, yes.
um, yeah, that's a fun topic. We won't go into that one too much today because we've both covered that very much over the last year. Because at one point on TikTok, thanks to a certain creator who didn't believe Rome existed, that became a hot topic for a while. I'm trying. I don't
Bless.
want to say her name because we'll summon her.
Oh,
But
I expect her to appear behind me.
yeah, just like suddenly, um, uh, I really want to go on about the beef she had with Metatron because Metatron's actually spoke about the Cleopatra stuff in Egypt as well because Egypt is one that this is sort of on topic, so we can go for this tangent. Egypt is one that everyone sort of wants to claim. That you get like you say, you get the especially with Cleopatra where she was sub-Saharan African. Obviously, we know
The
historically.
Afrocentrists,
Yeah,
yes.
it is hard because I try to avoid politics as well because I try to be mostly funny, and then on YouTube I go into a bit more because I can be more informative. But how do you actually like the balance it? Because especially in today's society, history and politics have become really intertwined. I've found like really intertwined.
What we have to understand is history and politics has always been intertwined.
Yeah.
Even if we look at the Romans, how they saw themselves.
Mm.
If we look at like the Roman kingdom period, the period of the seven kings, and how
Yeah.
each of the kings introduced a essential part of Roman society. So Romulus introduced the Senate, for example, and subsequent kings introduced the stuff like the assemblies and stuff like that. What we know is that was probably not true, and it was only written to be that way, so
Mm.
the later Romans could claim that this is the history that gave them legitimacy.
Yes.
And if the Romans did that, and if we're doing that now, what we can understand is politics and history are intertwined in a way that few other subjects are, I think,
I
because one legitimizes the other.
Yes, no, I totally agree. I mean, if you look, you've only got to look at sort of the actions of Mussolini. Really, like he used Rome to legitimize his own politics and his own
Mm.
policy. He was just very
Even
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, even if we look at Adolf, I'm not going to say his last name for obvious
Yeah.
reasons, but or the whole movement of German nationalism,
Mm.
they look to the ancient past at a certain Germanic group who
Yes.
defeated a certain Italian army. I think we all
Yes.
know in that deep forest somewhere. I'm not going to mention any names because I think we all know it.
Yeah.
But essentially, we all look to our ancient past, especially during the period of nationalism, to find legitimacy. So Adolf found it in the Germanic tribes, Mussolini found it in the Roman Empire, and even if we look at over in England, we had a fascinating sort of everyone was fascinated with a Celtic tribalism at the time, and
Yes.
that's which very and even if we look at I don't know, China even today, when looking at whether these islands are part of their national sovereignty, they often look back to ancient history and go,
Mm.
oh my God, this emperor from 3,000 years ago once claimed this island, therefore it's ours. Everyone does it.
It's yeah, no, I mean there's also like figures who like if you think about it, like Boudica now or Boadicea, however, I know obviously there's still a lot of debate surrounding her
I
pronunciation.
pronounce her as Boudica, which is probably the worst
Boudica.
pronunciation you've ever
I've not
heard.
heard that in a while. To be fair, I always known it as like Boudica or Boadicea. Boudica was like when I was really young that was the name everyone used. But um,
Cancel me. It's not socially acceptable anymore, is it?
it's yeah. Wait, the thing with history is it's continually changing because we're always going to find new things because we're literally piecing together fragments of history. I think it was the most shocking statistic I ever read was only 1% of human history has ever been recorded, and we still have that information now. I don't know how accurate that is, but
Um, I don't think that's something that is quantifiable because you're going to end up asking questions like, what is history? Is you drinking that mug of tea history? And if we didn't
True.
record it, would it be considered as lost? So, yeah,
That
that's
is that
not
is
something
that is
I want to
true.
explore too far.
And you, yeah,
Mm.
yeah. No, I see what you mean. I've never thought about it like, yeah, no, I do actually see your point there. But going back to like my point of Boudica is looking at, especially with nationalism, there is no way Boudica would be happy with how she was in the Victorian era, especially viewed as a British hero of the British Empire. There is no way she would hate any like imperial force, especially an outsider. Um, and
I'm not sure. Maybe if the Iceni became the center of a huge empire that, covered Britannia and defeated the Romans, that's something she could have been very proud of.
Would you do you think in an alternate history sort of scenario she could have become that, or because I don't think any Celtic tribe could have really held together an empire for long because the infrastructure and their government type just isn't there. You could adapt, I
No,
suppose, but
I don't suppose they could have had an empire that large, or even have an empire that could cover Britannia. But the point I'm making is, um, uh, her ideals of anti-imperialism, I think, are mainly about defeating the Romans who are threatening her family and her tribe,
that's
and
true.
not any modern ideals of anti-imperialism as a moral evil.
Yeah, I mean, that's also something that we often forget is our. I think I discussed this before briefly with Historical Hand. Is we our modern ideals, we often look back to the past and then we imprint on these people who, like Marcus Aurelius, who is one of my who is my favorite Roman emperor. I'm that edgy kid. Like, yes, the philosopher emperor, I love him. Like for the time period, he is a very progressive person, but he still was participating in things that we see as abhorrent. And how do you think we can balance that? Like looking, especially when we're going back like to the time of Alexander. Again, like from certain texts and viewpoints, he's a liberator, and from others, he's a vicious, vile conqueror. So it's
With Dan Collins, like Hardcore History, that podcaster, he once compared Alexander the Great to Adolf. And to be fair, it,
that's
Adolf in 2000 years, he could be seen as sort of an Alexander, a uniter who was, a great sort of figure. Because if you think about Alexander, is he worse? I think it could be easily argued that he's worse than Hitler. Because if you think about it, Adolf was, in his mind, in his own twisted mind, he believed he was doing good for the German people, and was doing good for humanity in general. Obviously, he was wrong. He was very twisted, and he believed he was, all these actions or the genocides he was doing was for goodness. But Alexander, he was conquering Persia for what? To self-aggrandize himself. He was just merely wanted
the
his page in the history books.
the official reason given for the invasion of the Persian Empire, or the Achaemenid Empire, whichever name you want to
Revenge, was
use,
it?
yeah, was revenge for the attacks on Greece, which was the official reason, which is how he got the Greek city-states to sit behind him. But he did have moments where there's a particular battle, where a group of Greek mercenaries surrendered to him and thought that he would take them in, because obviously his idea was uniting the Greek people, the Hellenic people, so to speak. And he just all to the sword, put them all to the sword. He put them all to the sword, and then put the rest of them to work as slaves. So yes, Alexander did do some awful stuff, like marching his army through a desert because he was sulking because they wanted to go home.
Yes.
Was he as bad as Austria, man?
I mean, most of the sources from the times has been lost. All the cities he sacked, and all you have to ask is why?
I think
Revenge? Is that the official reason?
I I think when
Simple power?
when comparing any historical figure to Historymeme, it's you have to, like, the only people you can really put on like sort of like is Stalin, is Leopold II, is Pol Pot. These
Those are
people who
all modern figures.
hmm?
These are all modern figures from about the same time.
True. This is not the direction I assumed this podcast was gonna go. Um, my content is so wholly focused on Alexander. I'm fighting for my life right now.
No, look, I'm a fan of Alexander. I think he was a tremendous person. I loved his hair. He was very youthful, and he, you know, since the thousands of years, since everything's happened, we can see that, he spread Hellenic culture to the entire world and really put, Greek culture on the map in a way that just wasn't possible before, in a way that it would still be dominant hundreds of years later during the Roman
Yes.
period. But was it worth the slaughter of millions and millions of innocent people for that to happen? You see this argument with the Mongols too. Okay, sure, they invaded and slaughtered many people, but it introduced a whole period of free trade where you could
Yeah.
walk from Beijing to Europe without being attacked by pirates of some kind. Not pirates, but the land equivalent.
I
The
know.
word's not coming to me at the
Bandits.
moment. But
Bandits.
what was and culture spread and flourished, and there was the economy boomed. But was that worth the killing of tens of millions of people?
I do see a point there, because isn't Genghis Khan like known to be like he himself, and through just his conquest, not his descendants, just his conquests killed the most people in history. Is that a fact?
I probably as a percentage of the
Yeah, as a percentage
of the amount
of the population at the time. Yeah,
I think someone will have to fact check us
someone
because
someone in the
history is long
comments.
and huge.
So,
I'm pretty sure that the first European who spread smallpox to the Americas probably killed more people
yeah,
than anyone else.
that's yeah.
But
I
uh,
did
sorry,
I
a
did
point I
not
want to
see
make
this.
to Genghis
I did
Khan
not
is
see.
I'm sorry, but a point about Genghis Khan is he never intended to spread, Chinese culture and, have a unified economy. That was never part of his plan, but it's something that historians have later,
Attributed to him.
attributed that to him because, his actions directly resulted with this. So, um, we can
I
have many arguments
have
about the morality.
good
Yes.
counterpoint. Good counterpoint with Alexander. I can't defend Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan did too much bad stuff, and especially when you get to his harem, that's the Genghis Khan fanboys are very hardcore, and I've had them in my TikTok comment sections
If they
multiple
had to
times.
take a whiff of his trousers, they would not support him. Apparently, the Mongols, they never wash their clothes.
Really, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I could have happily not known.
There's some superstitions around that, and there's some practical reasons because all the oils you build up do help you protect you against the cold bitterness of the Eurasian steppes. But yes, they probably smelled very bad.
I suppose if it's cold, then it wouldn't smell as much. Because cold, dirty clothes don't smell as much as hot, dirty. This is a weird. This has gone down a weird
True.
direction.
You were about to say something interesting before I
Yes.
rudely interrupted.
With Alexander, he was known for in the places he conquered. Like obviously Egypt, as far as I know, welcomed him pretty much with open arms. Less of a we're being liberated, more of a okay, cool, the Persians are gone. I believe it was similar in Judea, but I will say his preservation of Persian culture, and obviously when he gets up to the Indus River, he was really big on making sure that the cities weren't looted unless they revolted against him. If the city revolted against him, there was one case where he put the entire male population to the sword. But I will
You're
defend.
assigning morality to the actions of him. You're saying that he's, a good person. He would spare cities as long as they didn't revolt against him. But I think the more likely is he simply needed to solidify his power.
Yeah,
You simply can't pillage and rape and kill everyone in every city just because you want to. You need to somehow, for this is just realpolitik, I suppose. And something else you've said about him being quite nice and preserving Persian culture. One could say the exact same thing about the Mongols.
true. I mean, yeah, the Mongol Empire, isn't it? It's one of the, to my knowledge, it's one of the earliest secular empires because most of the Khans were like happy with people worshipping various different religions.
That's no different from the from ancient Rome and ancient Greece. They had, your own gods, but they also understood that other peoples had their own gods too, and you respected them. And as long as their gods don't, threaten your state, like Christianity, for example, then it's fine. It's all good
Yeah.
to go.
Rome was different. Rome was very successful. I believe it was one of their biggest success stories in the way they integrated other gods. When I was actually doing my video on Saturnalia, I believe there's a Roman god that was worshipped in Bath called Sulis Minerva or Minerva Sulis. It was one of those way around. I should remember this. I only researched it like a month ago. But it was they took the local god, which I believe was Sulis, and then their god, which was Minerva, and then they because it was similar, they merged it together. And I think the reason the Romans were able to maintain such a grip was because they were able to successfully I know it's a Doctor Who reference. It's a bit like the Trilotane in Doctor Who, where they like take bits of different cultures and stuff. And it's sort of that adaptation. It allowed the Romans to become woven into the fabric of that society, so to speak.
Yes, yes. I don't think that's an exclusively Roman thing.
No,
I'm
no.
pretty sure that pretty much every single classical society did this, and that's
Mm.
how the Romans, I think, themselves got had Greek and Etruscan
Yeah.
gods and religion and culture integrated into their own. And yes, something about the pre um particularly pre-Christian societies, is that y- their religions was very open. It wasn't, very written down, and therefore they could accept new ideas
Mm.
and new gods. And there wasn't, the word of God, which
Yeah.
was quite unchangeable, even though it was changed quite a lot.
I must admit, talking about like the word of God and the changing of religion and stuff like that. I must admit that the story of Christianity in Rome is incredibly inspiring when you think about it. How we've gone completely off topic of what this was going to originally be, but this is interesting. I'm
We,
liking where
we
this
can answer
discussion's
this
going.
question and then we
Yeah,
can
yeah.
go back to
We
the to
we'll go.
Romans.
Um, but how they went from like one of the most oppressed groups within the empire, and then eventually being championed by one of the most famous. He's obviously Constantine isn't spoken about as much as a lot of the other Roman emperors, but possibly one of the most successful Roman emperors. It's a real like from rags to riches sort of story, I think.
Yes, but once again, I'll counter that by saying this is not particularly unusual in any way. Even if we look at communism, I suppose that was a terribly, like, look at the Bolsheviks in the early
Mm.
1917. They were, just about to lose power. By the end of the year, by 1918, they were, ruling the largest empire in the world, apart from the British, continuous land empire. And I don't know,
True,
even
true.
if you look at Black people in the US, not that long ago, they were segregated. I mean, within living memory, they were segregated on buses, in bathrooms. We had redlining, and today they are one of the most celebrated groups in the country. And obviously, they still suffer from many problems, but culturally, yeah, they're celebrated.
I mean that
So
no, that just proves the conspiracy theory that history repeats, I suppose. If you think about
no, it rhymes. And
yeah.
if you put humans in similar situations throughout history, you're going to get similar results. You're going to see similar patterns, which is why so many people have compared the American Republic to the Roman Republic. And now we're back on
Perfect.
track.
That was a brilliant segue. That was well done. That was brilliant. So obviously, believe it or not, I know I speak mostly about the Roman Empire. Sorry. But I actually have better knowledge of the fall of the Roman Republic than I do the Empire.
Same. And I think it's far more interesting and far more relevant
Yes.
because if you're going to talk about the fall of the Roman Empire, firstly, you're going to have the problem,
Of
what
when?
fall?
Yeah.
Which fall? Because
I argue 1453. I argue 1453.
likewise, and the figure 476, well, the Romans at the time didn't think it had fallen. And 470, if you look at 480, Odoacer, that is the barbarian
Yeah.
person who took over Rome after 476. He rebuilt Rome. He was officially some kind of vassal under the Eastern Empire. So I suppose someone could argue 476 or the reunification of the Roman Empire. So, and it was such a different society from ours structurally, I think government and the idea of barbarian invasions. You must have heard the arguments that Rome fell because of barbarian invasions, and that's why we need to stop immigration. I mean,
I have heard that. Let's let's not open that. Let's not open the
okay.
comment section to that. I know I can see you would like, but I know YouTube comment sections. I know what's gonna happen if we open that Pandora's box.
Let's go back. Why do you find the Roman Republic so interesting, the fall of that
So
versus the empire?
the Roman Republic is because both periods of Roman history, like both, well, I say periods, but that's very much an oversimplification. Both the Roman Empire and the Roman Republic had their intrigue plots, their sort of the Game of Thrones style web of alliances and enemies. But in the Roman Republic, no one person should have had total control, but there are various times where they did. And especially towards when you look at the end with Julius Caesar, the second he got himself into the position that he did, the Republic was gone. There was very little chance of it not becoming. I don't know if they would have accepted it becoming a kingdom. Actually, that's an interesting question for you. Do you believe that Julius Caesar was trying to make himself king or not? Because I don't know if we've actually conclusively got evidence he was.
Yes, this is one of the biggest debates that historians have had for the last 2000 years. But I personally, obviously the word king is the wrong word to use.
Yes, yeah.
Probably dictator for life is the much better term because even at the late Republic, even during the Principate, I mean, Augustus would even have called himself Rex because there was such a social stigma against kings and, everything associated with kings, like the decadence, basically the East.
Which
I'm
is
just going to
another.
cough.
That's right. Which is
Sorry
another.
about that.
That's perfectly fine. But that's another like direct link to America, I suppose, because America still has, even though we're a few hundred years separate from the American Revolution, that stigma of kings and royalty is still very much prevalent from people in America I've spoken to about it. Which it's I can understand again while it's linking to the two periods of history.
I find it interesting that in American politics, you see, I'm not going to go into it too far because the comments might get spicy, but both
Yeah.
sides, they pretty much say the rhetoric is we are defenders of the republic, we are defenders
Mm.
of American values of democracy, and at the same time they're undermining democracy, they're
Yeah.
tearing it apart, and that's something we definitely saw in the late Roman Republic as well.
Yes.
I mean, you had Sulla, that first infamous dictator
Mm-hmm.
without a time limit.
Yeah.
He was claiming to be restoring the constitution and restoring the republic to its former glorious state. Even Julius Caesar.
It's fine.
Uh,
You can use our pronunciation. We'll get told off
I,
whatever
I
we
just
do.
get
We'll get.
I just get confused faces when I say Julius Caesar, so I've trained myself to say Julius Caesar now. But basically, even he was saying that he was restoring the republic in a way. Um, Obviously, he made himself dictator for life, but he was restoring order. He was fixing many of the systemic problems that the Republic had. Like, for example, since at least the time of Tiberius Gracchus, so 133, fact check me, but since, about
No
100
problem.
years before Caesar's time, um, we've had proposals for land reforms, and unfortunately, I think land reforms was one of the most important
Yes.
things that Rome had to sort out. And it's just such a pity that it took the end of the Republic and countless civil wars and 100 years to finally get it sorted out.
That's what
That's something you want to get into?
I
Land reform?
I I I think Rome in either the Republic or the Empire. That was one of the things when was it the Parthians or the Persians? I believe it was the Persians. I remember watching a documentary. It might have been the Kings and Generals video actually. Which to everyone watching, watch Kings and Generals because I've heard from historians they actually get it really spot on. But the Persians often saw the Roman Empire. In fact, where we glorify Rome today, especially in like Western societies and cultures, at the time, especially in Persia, they saw Rome as weak because every time they had a disagreement or they wanted a new emperor, it fell into civil war, which was what really hindered Rome a lot, especially in the time of the Republic. Because, like you say, they were arguing over simple stuff like land reform.
And you know about Jakarta, yeah? In North Africa during the late Republic, they were just, playing Rome like a fiddle.
Yeah.
All you had to do was to convince them to not invade, was to just sprinkle a bit of money in the Senate, and magically the question of invading them would just go away.
Oh, the Roman Senate is like I know I'm not going to make the joke I was going to. You probably know what I was about to say by when I say the Roman Senate was incredibly corrupt, and I was about to make a joke involving modern day politics, but I won't do it. We'll keep the comments unspicy. But all I'll always say is my favourite moment in history is when the Dutch ate their prime minister. That's forever that's forever my running joke of my favourite, and it is genuinely my favourite moment in history because it's just so wild. But
Yeah,
I've
if
lost
it
my
could go back to the idea of how the Roman, Republic ended because of land reform.
yeah.
I think
Sorry,
it's
sorry, I've
very
gone on a tangent
interesting.
there.
I do think it's extremely interesting to see how a political system where good reform can't be passed, because to pass it, you'd be giving your political enemies a win.
Mm,
And I think, was it JFK who said this? If you can't make peaceful reform possible, you make violent reform inevitable. I'm
yes,
probably misquoting whoever said that. I don't even know if it was
I've heard
JFK,
that.
but
I've heard it. It does sound like something that it sounds like either something JFK or Reagan would have said. Like they're because I know Reagan. He famously said that there's only one way you can have peace, and that's surrender. So that's why that reminded me of
hmm.
that quote there. But sorry, go on, I interrupted you.
Yes, here's a spicy line I'm going to say. I'm going to say that wealth and empire destroyed the Roman Republic. So
Go on.
basically, so basically, what the center, the what, uh, right at the bottom of the Roman state, what made it a state was the citizen soldier. So
Mm,
these were the farmers who owned their own pieces of land. And to become a soldier in the Republic, you needed some kind of decent land, because the idea is if there's an invader and your property is threatened, you're going to fight really hard, because they're literally invading your little farmland. It's going to, affect you. Unfortunately, as Rome expanded, um, as they start, because at the time, these campaigns wouldn't last very long, because you'd simply campaign during, the non-farming season, and then you'll
mm,
be home to plant your seeds and, to return being a farmer. But the problem was, as Rome expanded, this became more and more difficult, as you were fighting in Greece, you were fighting in Spain, you were fighting in North Africa. You simply couldn't return to your farm to be a farmer. And as a result, all these farms started, sort of going all wrong. They were all dilapidated, and essentially, as Rome expanded, you'd also have a lot of wealth being generated by a very few people who weren't the citizen farmers, sorry, the citizen soldiers. And essentially, people will go and buy these destroyed farms which have been neglected for very cheap prices, because
yeah,
if your farm isn't, profitable, you might as well sell it. So,
yeah.
and then as Rome started expanding even more, you'd have hundreds of thousands of slaves. I mean, Rome must have sacked dozens and dozens of cities in the 140s and 130s alone. And every one of those cities would produce tens of thousands of slaves. And Rome at this time was only about 500,000 in population. So even, I don't know, 50,000 slaves, that's 10% of the population. That's absolutely gigantic. So with these farms, which are now bought by these rich people, they would, just man them with slaves. And what are these citizen soldiers going to do? Because they haven't got land anymore, so they can't really fight. Um, um, and
I mean,
I
that's
suppose they're being, yeah.
it's one of the reasons that Julius Caesar was so hate. I mean, yes, there is the debate of was Julius Caesar a good person? It's one of those things in history when you dig deep enough, everyone's an awful person. It's the one conclusion you can come to.
Oh, yes.
I'll
If we
mention
dig
some
into
people.
you, you would be a terrible person somewhere.
I hope not. I hope not. But I see
No,
what you
a
mean.
bit, especially for powerful people. If you dig far enough, you're going to find something that they've done that's immoral,
Yes, no, agreed.
especially if it's a person from the past.
With Julius Caesar, it's in Gaul,
Yes.
but the flip side of that, and the reason that I believe he was so hated by the Senate is because like he did stuff like there was specific, I believe it was Celtic tribes actually in the northern part of Italy that he wanted to become Roman citizens. Can't remember 100% if that's true or not. The biggest thing was the like you say, it goes back to the land, and he wanted to give a lot of that to the people, and
Mm.
he really was. It's an oxymoron in a way, because we are like looking back at history, and everyone home. The biggest thing you have to remember is when you're looking at Roman history, especially, if it's written after the fact and it's written by the detractors, they're not going to come off good. Which is why I still defend Commodus to this day, because he wasn't a good emperor, but he didn't do all that different to what other emperors did.
I would defend Nero if I had to.
We'll get. Oh no, we're getting into that into a second. That's a very unpopular opinion, but with Julius Caesar, where he, especially in his will, he left tons of money to the people of Rome
Mm.
specifically. Obviously, he didn't have enough to share out to the entire Republic at that time. The Republic itself was huge at that period, but it's because the Roman Republic had moved into this period where the wealth and the land was owned by such a small group of people, and it had moved away from that older system, that he was coming in, and not only was he giving a lot of this power back and weakening the Senate, he was then in trying to ensure he would stay in power. And so
Okay.
Sorry,
I'm
go
going
on.
to have to stop you there.
Okay, go on.
Basically, we can't attribute all of this to Julius Caesar. I know we love him. He's great, but unfortunately, he was just part of a much larger movement that's been going on for a century. You know about the
Fair.
Optimates, which
Okay,
are
yeah.
the conservatives, and the Populares, which are the liberal reformers, which started with Tiberius Gracchus in 133. And I think Gaius Gracchus, who was Tiberius Gracchus's little brother, wrote about Tiberius's wanderings in the Italian countryside and being dismayed that there weren't any citizen farmers anymore, and all he saw was slaves. And this reflected in, I think there was a speech about how Rome was seen as the conquerors of all, but you don't have a single plot of land to call your own. Something about that. Some very socialist, modern sounding lines. And um,
That
essentially, yes, there's a big argument throughout history that's happened since Roman times. Were these populares really doing it because they were good people and cared about the poor, or do they see this as an opportunity to gain popularity, to gain power, to become one of the great men of Rome that, they idolize so much?
this is where my skepticism comes through, and I'm going to 100% say they did it to gain popularity. I think maybe one or two of them did do it out of the kindness of their own heart, but I think, especially, and as much as I've just
What
praised
about
Julius Caesar,
Caesar?
I would say even to a degree that the man was ambitious. I think he probably did a good chunk of it to gain. Like, it became standard practice. A lot of times, leaders of um Roman Roman legions. I don't know why I forgot the name for legion. Then the Roman generals would often promise their legions wealth and land, and that was often a retirement plan for legionaries, that they would go off
Mm.
and get their own plot of land, so to speak. And that became practice. I mean, it was practice long before Julius Caesar as well.
Well, not that long before. That wasn't, that wasn't normal for most of the Roman Republic. I'm going to cough again.
That's fine. That's perfectly fine. But I know,
So,
but
but
I was trying to cover myself because I was trying to admit
mm,
like Julius Caesar wasn't really the guy who came up with it, but the having control, like having armies like you, was the incredibly important thing. So I think applying that to a general population wouldn't be a great leap for any politician of the time. I think all politicians, if you look at Athens, they had a system where like a certain wealth had to do certain duties, and then if you wanted to get out of that, you had to lose a certain amount of money, so you wouldn't have to do that certain duty anymore. They weren't doing it out of the kindness of their heart. They were doing it for status and how they looked. It was humans are anything if self. This is sounding so cynical. Humans are like always going to be selfish, and how they look is always going to be. But yes, you will still have people doing things for the kindness of their own heart. But I think it is, especially with people in positions of power, oftentimes going to ensure they
mm.
get more power.
Yes, I do believe that leaders inherently, these are ambitious people.
Hmm.
You won't get a normal, kindly person, fighting in the upper rings of the Roman politics. It's just not in their nature, I suppose. And therefore, all these powerful people, you have to design a system that will channel their ambition to do good in society. And for the longest time, that was the Roman Empire, sorry, the Roman Republic. But unfortunately, a point you brought up was, how important it was for soldiers to love their generals. That was one of the defining moments that sort of ruined the Republic. I
Yes.
mean, they're supposed to represent the Senate. They're supposed to be defenders of the people of Rome. But in 88 BC, when Sulla, he was marching towards Mithridates, but then Marius and the Senate, asked him to give up his soldiers because after plebiscite, they relinquished him from command. And then Sulla said, no, these are my soldiers and they love me. And then he decided to march on Rome. And that was one of the defining moments in history when the legions, they had more allegiance to their commanders rather than to the state. And that was the beginning of a very long and hard time for Rome.
Yep. That is that. If you think about it, is the like you say, it's the beginning of the end of the Republic, and it's the Empire isn't set in stone as happening at that point. The Empire, to be fair, the Empire is avoidable right up until Augustus makes himself princeps. I know it's first among men is what it means. 'Cause like you say, he
Yes, yes.
wouldn't dare call himself king. But also, as far as I know, Augustus didn't directly call himself emperor, did he?
No, no, that's a later invention. But it should be said, there was also a moment right after Augustus's death when nobody really knew what was going to happen because there wasn't a clear line of succession. And I think there was about a week where someone in the Senate could have probably have reinstitute, sort of brought the Republic back. But I think because Augustus had been in power for so long, the institutions of the Republic were, the institutional memory of how a republic worked was simply gone. So despite the opportunity being there, they couldn't reinstitute it. Yes, reinstate it.
No, I agree. It's people got used to it once people got used to it. I mean, do you believe if maybe Mark Antony had won over Augustus,
No.
you still think he would have gone to an empire? You don't think he would have gone to a republic?
I'm not sure if it was Roman historians, convinced under the pay of Augustus writing this, but there were rumors that Mark Antony wanted to split up Rome among his children with Cleopatra.
Oh, okay.
Not only Rome, but also Egypt and other provinces between their family and sort of turn Rome into some kind of Ptolemaic state.
I knew that he wanted to make Alexandria in Egypt the center of like the Roman world rather than so Egypt like people underestimate Cleopatra a lot. It often annoys me. I mean, it's changing now, obviously. But through like when I was growing up, Cleopatra was always seen as this like seductress, whereas she was actually one of the smartest figures in the ancient world. I mean, she did so many building works, and she really, really reinvigorated Egypt. And she played two of the most important men at the end of the Roman Republic like a fiddle. Which is also a mistake of, or maybe it was a genius idea from Augustus to get Mark Antony off into Egypt because it allowed him to make the maneuvers he did.
Yes, but at the same time, it gave Antony one of the access to one of the most powerful states in the world. And
True.
to be honest, Egypt, if it was led by a competent leader, could have easily
Curb stomped Rome.
I'm thinking about that. Maybe not, but they could have definitely challenged Rome because we do have to remember that especially in later times, so even during the late Republic, a lot of Rome's grain came from Egypt. And if they were to cut it off, then Rome would be in a bit of bother.
Well, that's one of the main complaints people have towards towards Commodus, is how he dealt with the grain and then like starved. Although it was meant to be one of his like close advisors that did that, and he was unaware. I get a lot of mixed reports about Commodus. But while we're on to bad emperors, I'm going to ask you, what is your defense of Nero? I am very curious of that.
I think I'll be quite general with this in case I trigger anyone. But the Christians have sort of used him as a boogeyman. The idea that Nero threw Christians to the lions, the idea that even the idea that he, burnt Rome and played the fiddle, all of these are modern historians have been looking back at this, and there's very little evidence that any of this happened. And
Yes.
I'm not an expert in this, so my recollections of their arguments are a bit hazy. But essentially, when it comes to the persecution of Christians, it's often depicted as this huge defining moment in Christian history. It was the one moment that sort of, you know, because this is still very early on in the history of Christianity. It was one of the moments that was seen to have solidified the that has galvanized the Christian community together. And there's nothing that galvanizes the community together better than a common enemy, and that enemy was Nero. And unfortunately, there's very little evidence that any of this existed. And the idea that he was a enemy of the Christians is likely a later fabrication.
I mean, I know, obviously the fiddling while Rome burned. I know he definitely he. I have made joke videos on TikTok about this before, and I always put allegedly. I honestly don't believe he took as little action as is stated, but I do believe he definitely took advantage of the destruction because that, like, he wanted
Mm.
to remodel.
Oh yes. He built his own pleasure palace
Yeah,
in the burnt areas. So I won't defend him as being a good emperor, but I will say that he's not as evil as history likes to remember him as.
that's a fair. We know that. I mean, as far as I'm aware, that the Christian candles stuff has been debunked now because that was huge, right? When I was growing up watching horrible
Mm.
histories and stuff, he turned people into candles. And then as I grew up, that was obviously, to my knowledge, correct me in the comments, if I'm wrong, but to my knowledge, the Christian candles thing has been mostly debunked. Um,
Mm.
you know what? The only thing, because Diocletian got brought up recently, because I was doing a video on Ranavalona the First, the Queen of Madagascar,
Yeah.
and she was known at the time as the Diocletian of our days. The only thing I truly know about Diocletian is that he's one of the only emperors to retire, and that he
Yeah.
was definitely the biggest persecutor of Christians in the Roman Empire. But
Mm.
Nero is, I do believe he did blame the Christians for this. I've seen that in a couple of
That's very
places,
possible. Yes.
but I don't know if, like you say, the persecution was as widespread. But again, the people forget the power of words. He didn't need to do it himself. All he needed to was really turn the tables and go, oh no, my poor management of the empire wasn't the fault. Like, I did this isn't the fault of of me. If you blame the Christians, and all you've got to do is turn the populace on somewhere else, and they can do the dirty work for you, so to
Mm.
speak.
I guess this is something that authoritarian regimes do all the time.
Yes.
If this happened during the Republic, we would have far better sources on what actually happened.
Yeah.
Because it is funny how the Emperor is a lot more recent to us, but all our sources basically talk about the Republic, and that's because there was such a vibrant political culture at the time, and unfortunately, as I can't remember, but some kind of Roman historian wrote a really good history about the civil wars. I can't remember which civil wars, but one of the emperors sort of banned the book because it was too accurate. And I sometimes do wonder of all the rich history we lost because the Roman Republic came to an end. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, especially with Rome, like using Commodus as a source again, a lot of the sources we have on Commodus are from his political enemies.
Mm.
Made the camera wobble, which goes to, again, as you said right at the beginning of the podcast, politics and history are deeply intertwined because the same arguments we're having today they were having, well, obviously not the exact same, but you get what I mean. They were having all that time, like thousands of years ago, in the Roman Senate. I've completely lost track of the point I was trying to make there.
Do you think Sulla was a good man?
I know very little about Sulla. I know most about the end of the Roman Republic, but
Marius.
from what I do know, whenever it comes to figures of power,
Mm.
I always have my doubts on if they were good, because you can have ambition and be a good person, but once you're in power, the statement of absolute power corrupts absolutely is true for who's the I think his name I apologize to everyone because I'm going to horrifically butcher pronunciation, but his what's
What period?
no, I'm my brain's moved over. So one of Oda Nobunaga's in the feudal Japan. I think is something Hideyoshi.
Okay, I will know nothing about this.
I know
you can say anything, and I'll just nod along.
This is all coming from the very little I do know. It was. I think I got the. You know when you have the word in your head, but you know you can't pronounce it properly, and so your brain is struggling to get it out. It was something Hideyoshi. He was, to my knowledge, a peasant when Oda Nobunaga found him. And he rose up the ranks. He eventually became the shogunate, right?
Oh wow!
Once he was in the shogunate, obviously he then got taken out by Takegawa Ieyasu. I hope that's right. And anyone in comments, feel free to correct me. And if I've got names wrong, I'm so sorry. No. I'm going to the comments. I apologize for the pronunciations here. But
cancel this man, guys.
Oh, don't. That's for TikTok only. YouTube is much more forgiving. If we had this live on TikTok, we'd be done by now. The second we brought up Alexander and Austriaman in the same sentence would be cancelled. But so what happened was he then. Oh, this is going to be really controversial, actually. And now I've realised what I'm about to say. He went on a complete totalitarian regime. He became so authoritarian. He took away all of the armaments of the peasantry because he didn't want them to be able to use it as a revolutionary way. He then went into in typical fashion for Japan, he invaded Korea. He turned from this person who must have suffered under various different people in positions of power, got into the position of power and caused suffering. I'm not saying he was a bad leader. I don't know enough about him. I know only rough stuff, especially from, I believe, the Netflix documentary on feudal Japan. And so that's my view of any people. I know I've gone wildly off topic, but that's my view.
Okay, let's talk about Caesar. Do you think that his use of authoritarianism was a force for good? Was it necessary?
Oh, this is going to get me in trouble.
Because, yes, I think we can have a good discussion in this area.
Yes, I believe it would. I believe it is sometimes. Okay, democracy is the nicest form of government. But the most effective...
Nicest? Okay.
The most effective form is a dictatorship. Or,
Yes, but the problems with dictatorships are the successions.
Yes.
You cannot guarantee that, things might be good now, but what about the next leader? And what about the civil war that could potentially happen once we find that next leader?
Yes. Do you know what? I don't think there is any good argument, but I think what Julius Caesar was sitting there and doing, obviously what he did in Gaul was horrific. I'll say that again for everyone in the comments comes to me, but the what he did for the reforms of Rome were necessary. Denzel Washington did one of my favorite quotes ever of that the devil only comes for you when you're doing something right. And the Senate, in my eyes, only came for him because he was doing things right and he was going to take power away from them. If that makes sense.
Yes, but you have to remember that at the time, everyone was still traumatized about the dictatorship of Sulla. And Julius Caesar, he had the idea that the only mistake that Sulla had made was that he didn't keep power for long enough. And as you can see, very potentially that the Senate will be absolutely spooked by this. And also a man, this has been a mood in Rome for about 100 years at this point, when a man is claiming to do good, but is also on the road to, forming an autocracy. That's when
Well, the
it's been a culture in ancient Rome that once someone claims to be king, you're allowed to kill them, and that's
yeah,
one of the big yes.
as the Dutch did with their prime minister and ate him, that sort of that sort of thing. Um, it's it's one of those things, like you say, like saying a controversial statement like that. He pretty much guaranteed. I can understand both sides of the argument. It's a tricky one. It's a really tricky one because absolute power is never a good thing for the populace because
Mhm.
it's good while so it's like
Is it? Because ancient Rome, sorry, the Roman Republic, even within 50 years of Caesar's time, how many civil wars did you have?
that's what I mean. It's
It
never a
must
good
be
thing. It's never a good thing for
you
the
must have
people.
had several civil wars which killed hundreds of thousands of Romans, not including all the other Italians and stuff. And you also had all these gangs, like very famously Clodius and Milo. They all had their gangs roaming streets and murdering people from the other gang. And um, I think there was a figure that Rome's population had halved during this time, which is absolutely insane. Imagine being on the ground during that time. And everyone knew that elections were a sham anyway. The way that people votes could be bought, and even even all the politicians, as we've discussed, were completely corrupt. There was this guy, I can't remember his name, but he was the supporter of Caesar while he in the Senate while he was in Gaul. And basically, the only reason he was doing this, oh yes, his name was Little Curio. I think that's what Cicero called him. And the only reason he was supporting Caesar was because in 50 something BC, he was in debt, and Caesar just paid for all his debt. And as a result, he became a client of Caesar. And everyone was sort of like this, a client of one of the powerful people. And when I say client, I mean basically a political slave of this person. And in an environment like this, how can a strong man could be a really good person to sort of bring everything under control. And even people in during the empire, they looked at the late Roman Republic as some kind of era of horrificness, and they were like, glad we don't live back then.
I see absolute power is good as long as the person holding the absolute power is good. But as we've looked at earlier, how like the likelihood of a good person getting to that position, because to get to that position you're gonna have to do nasty stuff. There's no way you can
Mm.
achieve that. But what I would like to slightly change the direction of the discussion, because I've just realised we're coming up to the hour mark now. We're over the hour mark now.
Oh my God, okay.
That's a sign of a good discussion though, when you haven't realised how long you've been talking. The triumvirate, because there was two triumvirates as well. Obviously, you had the one with Augustus, Mark Antony, and I can't remember the third person in the second triumvirate. But the first triumvirate especially, where it balanced power between Julius Caesar, Pompey, and the guy who went into
Crassus.
Persia,
Crassus.
Crassus, yeah,
Mm.
Marcus Crassus. Obviously, the second Crassus gets taken out. Obviously, the two men that Pompey and Caesar are then up against each other. Do you think that a system like the triumvirate, especially at the time period, was a good system because it kept there's three men with a lot of power and they keep each other in check?
I think Cato, the younger, made the point that the first triumvirate was the moment the Republic died, because for once, for the first time, it wasn't power wasn't held by the Senate. It wasn't even held by the assemblies. It was held by three strong men who basically called all the shots. And
Hmm.
if we're having the discussion whether this could have saved the Republic, then no, because in a system where only this is basically, I suppose, a Politburo or something like
Yeah.
that. You can hardly call one of those democratic. And yes, if this was claimed to be the Republic, well, the Republic's basically over.
But looking at it from like, 'cause obviously my main argument against someone holding absolute power is they can start making bad choices. I know I've been defending Commodus and saying he didn't do much that other Roman emperors didn't do, or did do, but he also did do a lot of damage to Rome, which a lot of Roman emperors also did. That's how we ended up with Rome becoming so weak towards the end. Well, the Western Roman Empire especially, and then the Eastern Roman Empire. But looking at a strength of, if you share absolute power between those three men, then if one of them starts acting a little bit wonky, the other two can be like, hey. But I suppose you do still have the same situation. If two of them start acting wonky and start doing like really bad
This
stuff,
seems like a very temporary situation.
so you don't think it's a
It
tenable.
could it could be good for a period of time when you have three equally formidable people, but looking at communist regimes and their politburos, they seem to have a tendency to become smaller and smaller over time. Before long, you have just one person calling all the shots anyway. But it is a tenable short-term situation. For example, in the first round for it, all three people got what they wanted. Pompey got land for his legion, Caesar got his commanding Gaul, and Crassus, I can't remember what he wanted. Can you fill me in? What did Crassus want from the...
Crassus just wanted wealth. He was the wealthy, isn't he? He's one of the wealthiest men ever
Yes,
to live, to my knowledge.
but for the first round for it to work, everyone wanted something that they couldn't get from the Senate. Like Pompey just had come from campaign as the most successful Roman general in the world, and all he wanted was land for his generals. Um, and I guess the Senate saw this as a person trying to make himself king, and was getting a bit too powerful, and now he's going to have this town full of his supporters, so that's a bit dangerous. But working with Crassus and working with Caesar, he was able to get that passed through the Senate. And Caesar, he was very concerned that his I can't remember. He just wanted his ruling goal to go on for a bit longer, I think. And obviously the Senate didn't want that because he was getting too much power. He needed to be stopped, but because he was part of this very powerful group of people, he was able to secure that. And I can't remember what Crassus wanted, but he was already the richest man in Rome.
I know it's something to do with wealth, because I know like the breakup of the triumvirate was it might have been actually his invasion of Persia, which, fun fact, that was where Julius Caesar planned to go next. If he'd survived in the Senate, that was going to be his next conquest. Because
the Roman standards back.
But as much as I am a fanboy of Alexander, there is still a pinned video on my TikTok of me drinking a certain liquid from Alexander, because that was a trend for a while, and I went with it. Which, yes, people, if time travel was possible, I would go back in time and sleep with Alexander. I'm not hiding that fact. I would,
They're very different dreams. I would get a hot water balloon and float on top of the Battle of Cannae and watch.
I mean, I'd be up for watching the battle, but I want to see if Alexander was a king or a dictator. Sorry, it was there. I love that. It was there. I was gonna shoehorn that joke in at some point, but it's got this has been a very mature and serious discussion. I had to throw a bit of humor in there somewhere, but no, I think it has. I've always seen like circling back round now. I've always made the joke of myself if I let too much of Alexander slide, and I think you've made the very eye-opening point to me tonight that I probably let a bit too much slide of Alexander.
No harm done. He was a figure from 2,300 years ago. I don't think there's much harm in fanboying over him.
Circling around, do you think, obviously now with modern history, we look back now, I mean, even World War I and World War II, we have people romanticizing it. So in a 1,000 years, do you see modern political figures now that are not naming, definitely don't name any because we'll get in trouble with some side of the comment section, but like, do you think now that there'll be political figures that there'll be a podcast like this where that they won't be debating Julius Caesar or Sulla or Augustus or Alexander? Do you think that will happen? It will just, to them, it will be just fun to talk about.
It depends on what type of culture they have in a few hundred years. But I had a very similar discussion that's also quite interesting. So sorry to avoid your question.
That's
but
fine.
essentially, when because obviously it's bad to look upon the colonization of Europeans in these in the Americans and the Australians, because there's still people living from those cultures and they're going to be hurt. It's very distasteful to talk about, to rubbing in their faces. But at the same time, we don't pay any attention to all the Gauls that the Romans killed. The French don't particularly care about the Gauls. In fact, I think the French are quite pro-Roman. They're happy that the Romans came along and gave them culture, gave them their language, gave them, the Latin alphabet and bards and everything like that. So at what point in history does it become okay to accept colonization as a form of good versus being ashamed about it? Because clearly, we've got the French with the Gauls. Obviously, we don't care about them anymore. Colonization by the Romans was a force for good, and we have the modern colonizations by the European countries with the indigenous peoples. That was bad, but at some point, will this bad colonization turn into the good form that we see with the French and the Romans? Do we need to wait a few more hundreds of years? When does it become okay?
I think it will be 2 or 3 generations after us. I think there will be 2 or 3 generations of it won't be full on, but it will be like when the Franks are coming in and they're starting to fill into France and stuff, and the Franks, because people forget the Franks were a Germanic people group originally, and they became Latinized. So I think that there's perhaps a degree of separation even then, because they weren't directly affected by it. I think now if you look at the heroes, the heroes of the sea, Alexander, Julius Caesar, Napoleon, all these people are venerated and honoured as great conquerors, but the heroes of history will always be people like Hannibal or Spartacus or Boudicca. The reason Boudicca was brought up as this great piece of British fighting spirit was resistance, which is ironic given the time she was
Would
brought up at.
Churchill be in that category, despite being the victor? He was defending his own land against the evil of
In the UK, that's a
Toothbrushman.
very controversial topic at the moment. Talking about Churchill, you have one side that will love him, and the other side that he is the worst thing that ever happened.
Well, you could put him in the Boudica category because, she was being invaded, and had she been successful at the Battle of Watling Street and Watling, one of those,
Nero actually wanted to
she would have been.
Nero wanted to leave the Britain.
Yeah. So she could have very possibly have won, and if she did win, she would be a Churchill-like figure, someone who defended her land from invaders.
I think she still, to a degree, is, because if she hadn't have made that one poor decision to not see that the Romans were funneling them in, because she lost her maneuverability in that battle. Also, we still don't know where the Battle of Watling Street fully took place as well, which I always find interesting, because you'd think a historic moment like that would be marked, which also kind of
battles
shows you...
are hard to place, especially
ones
that happened thousands of years ago.
Yeah, true.
Where did Cannae happen? The worst defeat of the Roman Republic. Nobody really knows.
That's true. Yeah, no, yeah, I see. I mean,
where did the Battle Marathon happen? Thermopylae is easy though.
Yeah, Thermopylae happened in Thermopylae. We've got that going. Which isn't, that's actually a really interesting, because the defense of this could be a good one to end on. I don't know how much of the Battle of Thermopylae you know about, but that is always sort of told as a story of the Greeks fighting off this oppressive empire. But if you look at culturally, and this is coming from someone who is an absolute fanboy of ancient Greek history, that's my entire thing. Culturally, the Persians or the Achaemenid Empire was actually a little bit more progressive than the Greeks were.
It depends on what you mean by by what's oppressive, because the idea of freedom in our current
It's
individualistic
very different,
age,
yeah.
freedom is a personal freedom. It's a freedom to have relations with someone from the same sex.
Yeah,
It's being able to change your
it's
gender.
true.
That's freedom. But from an ancient point of view, especially from a Greek point of view, freedom is freedom from an outside oppressive empire. Freedom is to the Romans, what made Rome so special was it was a free city full of free citizens because they weren't colonized by a outside empire. So from the
Yeah,
Greeks' point of view, they were the ones fighting for freedom. And from a point of view from a historian writing a few hundred years ago, they were definitely the underdogs fighting for freedom. And it's in our current progressive age where these
the
ideals
story's
have
flipped.
started.
The
Yes.
story flipped. That yeah, no, I think that again it goes back to what we said at the start that it's hard. It like even for me, even though I'm aware of that bias, it's hard to not look back at history and then you see something you go, oh, because of our modern ideals, we take that in and we go, that's a good thing. Whereas at the time, it was a bad thing, and vice versa.
Mm,
I mean,
definitely.
we still have like a lot of people still believe back then in Rome and ancient Greece and stuff that LGBT Q plus people were all accepted. But if you how do I word this for YouTube safety? If you received, you were like degraded, so to speak.
Yes,
Um,
yes, it's a very patriarchal society. If you were to
yes,
take the woman's position of submissiveness and being received,
yeah.
um, um, if you're some of higher rank, that was very shameful.
That's what that
But
was.
we
Carry on.
also have to be careful that these relations were mainly happening in the aristocracy, happening among the rich, the decadent, and it's unlikely that these very liberal, sort of almost modern ambivalence to homosexuality was also something happening with the poor, with the citizen farmers. So we do have to be very careful because
Yes,
most of Roman history it was written by the rich, and there's a huge disproportionate amount that we basically have no sources of the poor, and that's
that
very
was
troublesome.
that was something I learned when I was looking at Saturnalia was that all of the quite a few of the sources I watched and read were talking about how it was a complete reversal and that the slaves were on equal footing with the masters for this celebration. But when you actually look into it, okay, they were still cooking, but they could eat with them, and it wasn't actually every household, but it was the households that were writing this stuff because you want to look good and favourable to future generations, and it all goes back to status, and it's very the few people that wrote the history, like we know that there was a big feast, but we also know that big feast was just to more control the Saturnalia celebration, so they didn't get out of hand, sort of thing. So it's like you say,
But the Roman festivals, they were quite egalitarian in a way because
yeah,
they happened quite often, often many times a year, and it was a time where they got, so much food and pork and beef, which was very rare for the time, very expensive, and it was an opportunity for even slaves and the urban poor to join in on these massive street parties and feast themselves and gorge themselves, and it was very famous that I think it was at Sulla's funeral or Triumph, for one of his triumphs. There was so much meat that they ended up throwing it in the river because there was just so many leftovers. Um,
blimey.
it's something that our modern societies have kind of lost. I mean, we don't have publicly funded feasts that brought people together from all different classes of society. I think that's something quite beautiful that we've lost.
Oh no, it's I mean we used to. I don't know if you guys have ever done it in Australia, um, but we used to have like before the disease I can't say on YouTube because again they'll get mad and take the video down. Um, that rhymes with Flovid.
Creative.
Yeah, that was really imaginative. That you can tell it's midnight or 1 a.m. actually. What was I saying? That was it. We used to have street parties. We used to have very big street parties in the UK. I never really experienced it, but it's like in the sort of suburbs of London and especially when you go up north into the countryside, people would just get. It was more prevalent in the 50s and 60s. People just put tables in the street, and the street would be shut off, and people would just, and it was really communal. Which I think, again, I think we can briefly touch on this before we finish up. I don't know how much longer. I don't know what you've got to. If you're busy,
I haven't had breakfast yet, and it's almost midday.
Okay. We'll finish up with this. I think the sort of what would probably horrify actually a lot of the actual people we've been discussing is ironically the advent of social media has made us more distant from each other than ever before.
Yes, definitely. I know we all feel it, but sending messages to everyone, having your tweet liked by someone isn't the same as talking to someone in real life. And it's also something that I've seen in the work environment because as working from home has become more prevalent, it's become more acceptable to sort of just to have your colleagues in various different cities from even around the world. And so what we're seeing right now is people in their work environment just on their phones communicating via text, via Teams, via Slack. And when they get back home, when they log off from work, they're still on their computers, they're communicating via messages, via Facebook and stuff like that. So what we've created is a society that's quite displaced from people physically. And I don't know if we've seen the full ramifications of what's the result of this, but it doesn't look good because we do need more intimacy and
yes.
Even
yes.
Even talking to someone face to face via FaceTime is a very different experience from just messaging someone. And you see this all the time, I think, or maybe it's just my anecdotal experience, but younger people are more comfortable with just texting versus older people who would rather call. And there's a different level of intimacy.
Oh, I know.
So as we become younger, our default methods of communications become less and less intimate.
Oh no, I completely agree. It's something I've actively tried to change. Obviously, in this line of business that I'm trying to get in and push my way into being a content creator and stuff. I often find like there are plus sides. Like we could never connect in this way without social media, and I have friends in America where I could never connect without social media. So I think
yes, but at the same time, sorry to interrupt you, but without social media, all your friends would be in your local community, and because of social media, all your friends are spread out through the world. Obviously, I'm very glad that we've met, but it is a result of social media, and it is one of the largest problems that we do face, and it would probably be much better if we weren't, if all our friends weren't so isolated physically.
I know, I do agree, and with that, we started off reviewing the past, the politics of the past, so to speak, and we're now finishing off with a potentially bleak look into the future. But
yes, I've just insulted you and your friends.
But before we head off, is there anything you would like to plug?
I've got a TikTok, and I'm trying to expand by posting the same crappy videos to Instagram and YouTube and sometimes Twitter. Although once my Twitter Blue subscription runs out, I will no longer be able to post to Twitter because there's a time limit. Yes.
Yeah. No, that's good. But yeah, no, thank you for having thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
It was absolutely brilliant. This has been, the people at home don't know, but this has been in the works for a long time. This has been organising on two sides of the
We
planet.
live on the opposite, yes,
Yeah.
end of the world, yes.
Yeah, but you know, I'd love to do it again sometime. And to everyone at home, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.
Bye bye.